to proceed. Inshallah, we continue with our study of Tarikh al-Tashri' or History of Legislation, a book that is authored by Sheikh Umar Sulaiman al-Ashqar rahimahullah. May Allah bestow mercy on him. And last time we talked about the Sharia, including or al-Ahkam al-Fiqhiyya, or the fiqh, including both decisive and speculative rulings. Decisive rulings are the likes of Dhuhr is 4 rak'ahs, wine is forbidden. These are decisive rulings, meaning qat'iyya, certain. Some of those decisive rulings are ma'lum min ad-din bid-darura. Ma'lum min ad-din bid-darura means what? Must be known, necessarily known, essentially known, or must be known. When we say ma'lum min ad-din bid-darura, ma'lum means known, min ad-din as part of the deen, bid-darura by necessity. It is known by necessity to be part of the deen. Known by whom? By Muslims. So a Muslim growing up in a Muslim land, or a Muslim growing up inside a Muslim community, or a Muslim that has been a Muslim for quite some time, should never say, well, I did not know that eating pork is haram. And it would never be, it would never be conceivable that he actually doesn't know. So that is ma'lum min ad-din bid-darura. By the necessity of being Muslim, you should know that. It's a must be known. Ma'lum min ad-din bid-darura. So some of the decisive rulings are ma'lum min ad-din bid-darura. Those are the decisive rulings that are known. Some of the decisive rulings are not necessarily ma'lum min ad-din bid-darura, because there are many decisive rulings that some of them are known by the scholars only, and it is not ma'lum min ad-din bid-darura. The decisive ruling, like, basically that heirs will not have part of the bequest, or heirs are not entitled to bequests. That's a decisive ruling. Heirs are not entitled to bequests. So there is no disagreement. So not every consensus of the scholars, which would make the matter a decisive matter, must be known by the public, by the Muslim public. But the ma'lum min ad-din bid-darura is the highest ranking within the ahkam in this regard. You would not find a Muslim in his right mind who will tell you khamr is halal. You will not find a Muslim in his right mind who will tell you zina or stealing or sariqa is halal. No, you can't. You don't find someone like this. The only exception to al-ma'lum min ad-din bid-darura is the new Muslim, or the Muslim that grew up in remote lands where there is, remote lands. In our times, the virtual world, and the world is a small village and all of that stuff. But even in our times, they still find places where people are really disconnected completely from the outside world. But that used to be like a lot more in the past. And so if you grow up as a Muslim in an area where there is not much knowledge and you're disconnected, you're cut off from civilization, from the rest of the Muslims, and then you say, well, I did not know that eating, maita is haram. Maybe you did not know that eating, dead animals or carcasses is haram. So we said that fiqh does not only pertain to, some of the scholars said fiqh does not include those, because those are known by everyone. And a faqih, you're not going to call someone a faqih because they know that dhuhr is 4 rak'ahs. But this is part of fiqh, even though you're not entitled to the title faqih, if you You're not entitled to the title faqih if you know that dhuhr is 4 rak'ahs, although it is part of fiqh. And if you apply linguistic technicality, the faqih is the one who knows fiqh. So if you know that dhuhr is 4 rak'ah, you know a little bit of fiqh. But as much as like a physician is not, like a person is not entitled to the title physician if he knows that, you know, honey is good for wounds, for instance, or if he knows that, you know, this medicine works for that, then you're not entitled to the title faqih because you know some of fiqh. But those decisive rulings are the basis and foundation of fiqh, so they are part of fiqh. So we talked about this last time. And this time we will talk about a comparison between Sharia and fiqh, or muqarana bayna al-Shari'ati wal-fiqh. So Sheikh Umar, Allah yarhamu, rahimahullah, said the technical definition of Sharia according to the early predecessors is identical to that of fiqh. التعريف الاصطلاحي أو التعريف الاصطلاحي للتشريع عند أهل الصدر الأول يطابق التعريف الاصطلاحي للفقه عندهم. So as far as the earlier generation is concerned, fiqh and Sharia are the same thing. He will tell you also that this is true for the latter generations. Because to the earlier generations, fiqh and Sharia included all of their rulings, all of the aspects of their religion. Both fiqh and Sharia cover all aspects. For them, both fiqh and Sharia cover all aspects of their religion, including creed, rulings, and manners. They did not limit fiqh to the practical rulings only, but the fiqh to them included everything. So birr al-walidain is part of fiqh. You know, being kind to the parents is part of fiqh. To Ahl al-Sadr al-Awwal or the earlier generations. Furthermore, this definition of fiqh and Sharia, according to the latter generations, match. These definitions of fiqh and Sharia, according to the latter generations, match. Both of them cover the practical rulings. However, the underlying difference between them, which should not be ignored, is that Sharia is the religion sent down by Allah. So according to the latter generations, they limited Sharia and fiqh both to the practical rulings in terminology. But he's saying here that there is a difference between fiqh and Sharia that should not be overlooked or ignored. Sharia is the religion that was sent down by Allah. Allah said, شَرَعَ لَكُم مِّنَ الدِّينِ مَا وَصَّى بِهِ نُوحًا وَالَّذِي أَوْحَيْنَا إِلَيْكَ. He prescribed for you in religion that which He prescribed or that which He recommended to Nuh, and that which we revealed to you. Shara'a lakum means He prescribed. So the Sharia is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sharia is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whereas fiqh, he says here, Shaykh Umar rahimahullah, is our understanding of this Sharia. Fiqh is our understanding of the Sharia. If our understanding is correct, fiqh is then in agreement with Sharia. On the other hand, if we misinterpret the truth sent down by Allah, this misunderstanding is not to be considered the representation of Sharia, but it still remains within the realm of fiqh. And we said the reason why it remains within the realm of fiqh is what? Because you cannot, take it out. These are fuqaha that produced fiqh. They were mujtahideen, entitled, had the capacity, had the tools, and this is their understanding. So it is not in your authority to remove this from fiqh. But is it the Sharia? Not always. If it is correct, it is the Sharia. If it is not, then it is not. But since we cannot, except in a few matters, we cannot determine by certainty that someone actually made a mistake. So he says here we can pinpoint the difference. We can pinpoint the difference between the technical definition of fiqh according to the latter generations of scholars, and the general definition of Sharia in the following points. Here are the differences between fiqh and Sharia. The first one, which is the Sharia, is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the general difference. This is the precept of the rest of the differences. Sharia is what Allah sent. Fiqh is what we understand of what Allah sent. But practically speaking, in bullet points, here are the differences. One, fiqh and Sharia conversion diverge on a number of points. Both fiqh and Sharia apply the rulings in which a mujtahid reaches a judgment wherein he has agreed with the ruling enjoined by Allah. Fiqh differs from Sharia when it refers to a ruling wherein the mujtahid, in fact, in order for me to stop this from popping up here, I should disconnect myself. Okay, now it's not going to show. So, so basically, the conversion diverge. We say بينهما عموم وخصوص. The word بينهما عموم وخصوص. عموم is from عام. عام is general. عموم is generality. خصوص is from خاص. خاص is specific. Which means what? When we say between them there is عموم and خصوص. It means that sometimes one of them is more general than the other, and sometimes the other is more general than the other. That is what it means when we say بينهما عموم وخصوص. So sometimes fiqh is more general than Sharia. Sometimes Sharia is more general than fiqh. In which way? How could this be true? That sometimes fiqh is more general and sometimes Sharia is general. It depends on the angle that you're looking from. So basically, Sharia, fiqh is our understanding of Sharia. So fiqh includes all of the positions of the scholars, whether they were correct or incorrect. So in one particular matter, you could find 9 opinions. In one particular matter, you could find 20 opinions. So Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani mentions, rahimahullah, 20 different opinions concerning Salatul Asr, concerning Salatul Wusta, the middle prayer. حافظوا على الصلاة والصلاة الوسطى. Preserve the salah, your prayers, and the middle prayer. What is the middle prayer that's mentioned in this ayah? So Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani rahimahullah mentioned 20 different opinions of the scholars concerning the middle prayer. Now at the end of the day, we believe the most authentic position is that it is Asr, Salatul Asr, because there is a hadith from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But there are other justifications for the 20 other opinions. So those 20 opinions, that is all fiqh. But it cannot be all Sharia, because Allah meant one thing with this, So, and when the scholars disagree and one says halal and one says haram, to Allah it is either halal or haram, But the 20 opinions will be considered fiqh, and the Sharia here is one opinion, is one of these 20. So which one is more general here, fiqh or Sharia? Fiqh is more general, because fiqh has the 20 opinions. It's more general. It includes all the correct and incorrect, everything is included under fiqh. So when does Sharia become more general than fiqh? Has more umum, aam, more general than fiqh. No, Sharia becomes more general than fiqh in the sense of
clear understanding on the subject.
because Sharia is let me tell you this. The names and attributes of Allah, part of the Sharia or not?
Yes.
Part of fiqh or not? No. Part of fiqh in the general understanding of fiqh according to the earlier generations, which included the understanding of the whole deen. But fiqh as we know it, in the technical definition, does not include that. Does not include the types of hearts, and does not include, the prohibition of arrogance, and doesn't include any of that. So Sharia is three different components. Fiqh is one of them. Sharia is three different components. What are the three components of Sharia? Aqidah, creed, akhlaq, character, and ahkam, rulings. Aqidah, creed, akhlaq, character, ahkam, rulings. Ahkam is the plural of hukm, ruling. Okay, so in this way we know that there is this umum and khusus, or sometimes one is more general and at other times it's more specific. Now, number two, unlike fiqh, Sharia is complete and all-inclusive. Sharia covers the broad spectrum of fundamentals and principles that are mentioned. We're not talking here about akhlaq. Even in fiqh, Sharia is broader in spectrum, and I will tell you how. Even when it comes to fiqh. We said when it comes to fiqh, fiqh is more general because it includes all of the opinions. But that is not, that is from that angle. But there is another angle to look at Sharia and fiqh and say that actually Sharia is more inclusive, covers a broad spectrum of fundamentals and principles that are mentioned in the Noble Quran and the prophetic Sunnah. Based on these principles, we derive rulings which cover every aspect of our lives. As for fiqh, it is the opinions of the mujtahid scholars derived from the Holy Quran and the prophetic Sunnah. It is limited. Can you extrapolate from the statements of, Imam al-Nawawi or Imam ibn Taymiyyah? No. You don't extrapolate from their statements. Their fatwa is limited to what they talked about. But the statements of the Quran and the Sunnah, they give guidelines from which you branch off, you extrapolate. So they cover all aspects of life, whether directly or indirectly, whether explicitly or implicitly. But they cover all aspects of life. But the fiqh produced by the scholars is limited to what the scholars talk about. So the fiqh of the 2nd century after Hijrah included the rulings of surrogate mothers, the fiqh of the 2nd century after Hijrah. Did it include the rulings of surrogate mothers, IVF, short sales, and like 200,000 other transactions they make up every day? Okay, did the Sharia include those rulings? Yes. Otherwise we would be lost now. The Sharia included them, whether explicitly or implicitly, directly or indirectly. But how do we drive those rulings now? From the Sharia, from the principles of the Sharia. So the Sharia has this sort of like plasticity, like flexibility that you could make you extrapolate from Sharia. In this case, Sharia is broader in spectrum than fiqh or not? Yes, it is. Because the fatwa of the fuqaha, or the input of the fuqaha, pertains to only what the things they talked about. Whereas the statements of the Quran and the Sunnah can provide, can cover a much broader spectrum. In fact, by necessity, the Quran and the Sunnah, the revelation covers all aspects of life until the Day of Judgment. So you will always find Imam Shafi'i قال ولم تنزل بأحد من المسلمين من أهل دين الله نازلة إلا ووجد في القرآن والسنة دليلا عليها ووجد في القرآن والسنة in the meaning anyway وجد في القرآن والسنة جوابا etc. So nothing befalls a Muslim in this life at any time except that he will find in the Quran and the Sunnah in the revelation that he will find the answer to it. Okay, so number 3. So we said number 1, sometimes one is general and one is more general, one is more specific. Number 2, the broader spectrum of Sharia because you could extrapolate from it, versus fiqh, which is limited to what they addressed. Yes?
Will you ever say that there will be a time when fiqh catches up to the Sharia? In terms of, say, it's at the end of time, so there's no more ahkam after that. So everything that was talked about, that could have been talked about, was already extrapolated. I mean, there was nothing left to extrapolate after that. So in that sense, they would be even at that point.
Not really, because there could be some wisdoms that we have not been able to point out. There could be wisdoms of legislation. There could be, things that we as human beings were not able, like the Quran, the final ta'wil of the Quran, the final interpretation of the Quran. Will we have comprehended as humanity everything in the Quran at any time? No. Well, is there still knowledge that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala kept for himself? Yes. So you will be able at different times and different places to glean some benefits from the sun, but you will not be able to encompass all of the rays of the sun. It is not possible. There will be always knowledge that Allah had kept for himself. Third, unlike fiqh, Sharia is more general in applicability. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Holy Quran, and we have not sent you, O Muhammad, except as a mercy to the worlds. Such generality is vivid from the purport of Sharia, its ultimate objectives, and its texts, which address all of humanity at all times and all places. Fiqh is the working of the mujtahid. It may solve the problems of a society in the context of a specific time and place. However, that very same solution may not be applicable to the problems of another era or region. On the other hand, Sharia is constant and applicable to all eras and regions. Now, you could use this particular statement in so many different ways, some of them to completely destroy the deen. You could take this statement and run away with it and say every generation has its own understanding of the deen. So we do away with the fiqh of the scholars of the past and we start our own. But this is by necessity not what the Sheikh meant. I know the Sheikh personally. And this is not, in what you gather from all of his books. But to some extent, it is true in certain cases and certain scenarios. That the customs of people, time and place, are not consequential to the ahkam or the rulings of the Sharia by themselves. So the change of time and place is not consequential. However, time and place are vehicles, containers receptacles of different conditions, situations, circumstances, extraneous factors that will affect the ruling. So if you were able to identify that the ruling based on the Sharia changed over time, then in this case, you may say that time and place are consequential, but not by themselves, because of the circumstances within that will make the ruling change. Examples, because usually examples are, more helpful than just theories. Whether or not it is, but I'm giving you the example whether or not the ultimate conclusion is right. So Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anhu, when he found that the people who have become corrupted felt that, luqatat al-ibil, that when you find a camel, you should not leave it alone until its owner finds it. You should actually take it and announce it. Because the people have become corrupted, the Medina expanded a lot. And he felt that during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, luqatat al-ibil, or lost and found camels, or lost camels, it's the Medina of the Prophet ﷺ. During the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there is very minimal corruption and so on. There was corruption. There were munafiqeen in the Medina of the Prophet ﷺ. But the level of corruption would not warrant, that you take the camel, because likely no one will take it until the owner comes and takes it. But Uthman felt that things have become much different, that he instructed the people to take those and announce them for the benefit of the rightful owner. So that is where, is it just time, or it is because time as a vehicle here contained different circumstances that warrant revisiting the ruling? So it is not just the time. It is not just the time. So when the Hanafi scholars, the earlier Hanafi scholars, said that it is not permissible to take money for tahfiz al-Quran or ta'aleem al-Quran, teaching Quran, ta'aleem al-Quran. And then the latter Hanafi scholars said it is okay. It's the same madhab. It's not cross madhab thing. It's intra-madhab difference between the earlier and the latter generations. Is this just because of the change of times, or because of the change of circumstances within the time? Circumstances. The change of time is never consequential by itself, but the change of the circumstances. And the circumstances that varied are compelled them to revisit their ruling. Compelled them to revisit their earlier ruling. And yes,
So the original ruling.
the circumstances earlier on, the original ruling was basically to honor the Quran above, to honor the teaching of the Quran above being something with which material worldly gain would be sought. So the Quran and the teaching of the Quran should be higher than this. And you should not, intend by teaching Quran any worldly gain. But there is another factor also, that Baytul Mal used to give people what is sufficient to be devoted for this work. Like Abu Abdurrahman al-Sulami, rahimahullah ta'ala, one of the tabi'een. He sat in the masjid of Kufa for 40 years teaching people Quran. That's it. That's his business. He sat in the masjid of Kufa after he learned Quran from Uthman ibn Abi Talib and Ali and Abdullah ibn Mas'ud and all of those Sahaba, he felt that he should dedicate the rest of his life for teaching, people. So, for the years, certainly someone was taking care of him. Someone was taking care of him. So since the Bayt al-Mal did not become as supportive in the latter generations of those functions as it was, then they were compelled to revisit the ruling. So here the Sharia did not change. The Sharia is applicable all the times, but the rulings of fiqh changed because their applicability could be limited by the constraints of time and place. So the second position of the Hanafi scholars it did not depart from Sharia, but it departed from the fiqh of the earlier Hanafi scholars. Yes, Abdullah, did you have it?
I just want to say, as long as the circumstances are different in different region, then it's worth revisiting the ruling.
Can what?
As long as the circumstances are different in a different region, you have to revisit the ruling.
Yes. We said time and place are the same. These two factors are the same. They are not consequential by themselves. So you can't say that because we are in America, because we're Americans, so this is okay for us, everything is permissible. Or like people say, wake up, you're in America. This is... So you want to tell them, you wake up. This is Islam, doesn't change. But now if you find circumstances that would warrant a departure from the ruling in Morocco, for instance, then you will employ those circumstances. And we know that customs of the people are consequential. Customs of the people are consequential. So this is a very stark example on when, the circumstances would warrant a departure from the rulings. What's an example? Like, if a woman wears bright orange in Riyadh, it is not like wearing bright orange in Somalia, because bright orange in Somalia is the norm, the default, or Africa. Somalia nowadays may not necessarily be the same, but in most of Africa, Muslim women wear bright colors. It is the norm. In fact, if you wear dull colors, you'll be looked at weird. But so that would be consequential, because there is no specific ruling about colors. It is a concept that you should not attract attention to yourself. But there is no specific rulings in Islam concerning colors of attire. Anyway, so you understand the difference. The fourth difference between Sharia and fiqh. The rulings of Sharia are unquestionably true, whereas the understanding of the fuqaha may be erroneous. No. The fifth difference, the rulings of Sharia are fixed and eternal. It is also understood. So these are basically So how could we say that the rulings of Sharia are fixed and eternal, and we say that the rulings of Sharia are flexible and broader spectrum, and they can have this flexibility, change of time and place, because the principles are fixed. The principles are fixed. It is the idea that this particular action is closer to this principle that will make it halal, or to that principle that will make it haram. The principles are fixed. They are staying there in their place. They don't change. My action during this time, within this circumstance, in that particular location, my action is closer to this or closer to that. That is where the fuqaha, that's the work of the fuqaha. So basically, Sharia has this principle and has that principle. Sharia has the principle of honoring the Quran, for instance, and deeming it. But the Sharia has the principle also of giving priority to the preservation of the Quran. And if you fear that people will not be teaching because they will not be compensated and they will not have an income, then it is another Sharia principle that you should actually preserve the Quran, and compensation would be warranted in this case. Even though the issue of compensation was controversial from the beginning, because the Shafi'is and other scholars, they allowed compensation, even the earlier scholars within the other madhab. But this is how the Hanafis perceived the issue and how it changed between their generations. So the principles are fixed, but our actions themselves are not fixed. Like I said, the same behavior in Riyadh and, Chad may have different implications. The principle for women is to not attract attention. So bright colors would attract attention in one area, would not attract attention in one area. So the ruling of wearing bright colors may vary, even though the Sharia has not varied, because the principles of Sharia are stable, fixed and eternal. Could you also say, and this may be like treading in the dangerous territory here, could you also say that jihad would be different today? Or basically, it depends on your understanding of the issue of jihad and the purpose of the issue of jihad and and so on. But if you believe that jihad is not the first resort, if you believe that jihad should not be sought for killing and being killed, per se, but people have very different understandings of this issue. But although we believe that jihad is not limited to defensive, struggle, but when it is basically when you take the initiative, are you taking the initiative? Are you compelled to be fighting your next door neighbor all the time? We don't believe that, because the Prophet ﷺ, as we said, دعوا الحبشة ما وضعوكم واتركوا الترك ما تركوكم ولا تتمنوا لقاء العدو فإذا لقيتموهم فاثبتوا. Allah said, وإن جنحوا للسلم فاجنح له وتوكل على Allah. So Allah said, and if they are inclined to peace, then you should also be inclined to peace. The Prophet ﷺ said, do not wish to confront your enemy, but if you do confront them, then be patient. He said, leave alone the Turks as long as they leave you alone, and leave alone the Abyssinians as long as they leave you alone. He signed treaties of peace with people, and when we sign a treaty, we don't violate it. Yeah, Allah said in the Surah Al-Ma'idah, يا أيها الذين آمنوا أوفوا بالعقود وحلت لكم بهيمة. O you who believe, fulfill your covenants, to the end of the ayat. So, but with the fact that war nowadays is different from war during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, would make us even more inclined to looking for alternatives and to trying to avoid war nowadays. Means what? Means, massive deaths of civilians and non-civilians, and is very indiscriminate. Using like bombs and rockets and artillery and so on, is completely different from, two different, armies going out, because they did not fight in town. They fought, outside in the battlefield. So two different armies of capable men going out with swords and spears and arrows and so on to settle a dispute. And so when you do this and you sort of break the army, the casualties within the life of the Prophet ﷺ from both sides were about a little more than 1,000. That is from both sides. The 27 expeditions, the two sides, Muslims and non-Muslims, casualties were limited to a little bit more than 1,000. In return for this, in return for some casualties amongst capable men that are fighters, you liberate the people from the oppression of their rulers. In return for this, fighting the Romans, who suffered. The subjects of the Roman Empire were liberated. They said it. They attested to it. They swore by it, that the Ishmaelites came from the regions of the south to deliver us from the oppression of the Romans. So the price that is paid is this confrontation. And this confrontation takes courage on the part of the Muslims, takes dedication, takes sacrifice on the part of the Muslim that would make someone like Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, continue to fight through his mid-80s, where he died at the borders of Constantinople. So that determination, courage, sacrifice. And so you break that army and you deliver the people from the oppression, and that is the price you pay, and that is the reward you get. So the balance here of the benefit-harm on the benefit-harm scale is quite obvious. It's quite obvious. Those tyrannical armies that subjugated, humiliated, oppressed, nations throughout, the world, the inhabited world in the past. You break those armies and you liberate the people and you spread justice and you allow them the freedom to choose their Lord and to worship their Lord and so on and so forth. But nowadays there are multitudes of factors that will have to be considered. This is not basically liberal, modernist, cowardly talk. This is just, consider it. The difference between the price that is paid is humongous, is huge. And the Prophet ﷺ said that it is of the signs of the day of judgment, or the approaching of the hour, وَأَنْ يَكْثُرَ al-Haj, the death will be prevalent, killing will be widespread throughout the world. So this is not something that is intended for itself. So the price is humongous. World War II, the casualty, the deaths in World War II were about 60 million people, compared to throughout the life of the Prophet ﷺ about 1,000. Just compare this to that. And nowadays, with nuclear weapons and so on and so forth, the war could be extremely pricey. On the opposite side, if you have access to give da'wah to the people, and if they are not prevented from accepting their religion, keep in mind, the Romans and Persians would not have allowed, the Romans were torturing the Christians in Egypt because they chose to be a different denomination within Christianity. So people were, monks were being burned alive because they chose to be Orthodox versus Roman Catholic. So the Romans and Persians would have not freely allowed their subjects to just convert to Islam and then, exercised religious tolerance and so on, particularly of Islam, even though there was some degree of diversity of religions, more so like within the Persian Empire than the Roman Empire or the latter Roman Empire. They tried to cut down on this diversity. Constantine wanted to really unify the empire and give the empire one version of Christianity, not just one religion, but one version of Christianity. But at any rate, they would have not been quite, open, tolerant of the spread of Islam within their territories. Let alone the fact that they threatened the Muslims before the Muslims threatened them, and they violated their covenants with the Muslims before the Muslims attacked them. But in general, the price is different and the access to da'wah is present. So would you hasten to war in a case like this? No. So is this an example on where rulings may change, but the principles of Sharia are still the same? You still want to liberate the people from the oppression of the tyrants. That is clearly stated in Surah Al-Nisa to be the purpose of your offensive war. وما لكم لا تقاتلون في سبيل الله والمستضعفين من الرجال والنساء والولدان الذين يقولون ربنا أخرجنا من هذه القرية الظالم أهلها واجعل لنا من لدنك وليا واجعل لنا من لدنك نصيرا. Why don't you fight for the cause of the oppressed men, women, and children who cry out to their Lord, "O our Lord, deliver us from this village whose people are oppressors, and send to us from you someone who will give us victory, and send to us from you someone who will give us support." Clearly stated, in the Quran. Part of this is the right to worship your true Lord, your one true Lord. This is a right that this is a right that is considered a basic human right. And any authority that will prevent you from worshiping Allah will be considered an oppressor authority. So it is not just limited to oppression, in the classical sense, but any authority that will prevent you from the worship of your one true Lord is an oppressing authority and will be treated as an oppressing authority. But like I said, if the access is now open and the price of war is a lot more costly, we would still be within the principles of the Sharia if we said, hey, exhaust all of your means, avoid war. It has been always the last resort, but the earlier generations of Muslims needed to jump to that last resort quicker than we need to, for obvious reasons, not just limited to the Muslims. Watch the change of the geopolitical map of Europe over the Middle Ages. Borders have never been stable. This state identity, I am German, was never there until the time of the Renaissance, and after the time of the Renaissance, then the establishment of the concept of statehood itself. These were empires, and those empires expanded and shrunk and expanded and shrunk, and the subjects of those empires did not really worry much except about what? How much taxes will they levy from them, if that empire takes over, or this empire takes over, this ruling family or that ruling family, how much taxes will they collect? Will they be, fair or not? Will they collect too much taxes or not? And things of that nature. That's what the subjects worried about. Because there was no statehood. No, but honestly speaking, if you look at the Middle Ages, it is amazing. You know how empires shrunk and expanded. So it's something like this, but there are many of those videos, and some of them have the Middle Ages, and in the Middle Ages you'll see it's just completely amazing. Okay, so we finished those differences between Sharia and fiqh. Now, the branches of Islamic fiqh topics. When the jurists compiled the Islamic law into fiqh books, they divided the topics of this law into two major sections: ibadat, acts of worship, and muamalat, transactions. Did everybody divide them into ibadat and muamalat? Yeah, but the idea here is sometimes you have other different divisions. Sometimes there are things, or let's come to it, inshallah. So topics included in the acts of worship section, the most important topics covered in this section are tahara, and they usually start by tahara. Why do they start by tahara? Because how they arrange the fiqh books, they start by the ibadat, acts of worship first, because those are the rights of Allah on you and they should be more important. Then, out of the rights of Allah, they start by the pillars of Islam, right? Because those are the most important ibadat. Salah, Siyam, Zakah, Hajj. Salah, Zakah, Siyam, Hajj. Then, they don't start by Salah because Tahara is big enough to not be a chapter within the book of Salah. They used to call they used to call them Kitab such and such or Bab such and such. Why would they call them Kitab? It's a collection of many topics, because Kataba means what? Gathered. And why is Kitaba called Kitaba? Because you gather letters and words and sentences, paragraphs and paragraphs, and chapters and chapters, and so that's kitaba. It's gathering, the process of gathering. That's why a legion in the army is called katiba, from this gathering. So kitab is a big collection. So when they say kitabu salah, the book of salah, even though it is within the book of fiqh, they write, but they call it kitabu salah because it is worth being called the kitab by itself, salah. And then when they say bab, they mean that it is less than that. So the word bab means gate. And they called it gate because it opens a gate for you to exit from ignorance into knowledge. So they did not start by the book of Salah because they felt that Tahara is too big to be called a chapter within the book of Salah. So they made Tahara a book by itself. Kitabu Tahara, the book of Tahara, or purification. And here they did not talk about purification of the heart, because now we're talking about fiqh in the technical sense of fiqh. And fiqh in the technical sense of fiqh does not address the non-practical rulings, that is creed and character. So they are not talking about, the heart. So they singled out Tahara as a separate book, and they had to put it before Salah because it's a prerequisite for the validity of Salah. So you put the prerequisite before, what it is required for. And then salah, zakah, fasting, i'tikaf, funerals, hajj and umrah, mosques, their merits and related rulings, oaths and vows, jihad, food and beverages, hunting, and slaughtered animals. Okay. Now, hunting and slaughtered animals, food and beverages, some of the scholars said that this is not ibadat. Yes, you will observe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in your hunting when you say this may, and you observe Allah in your slaughtering of the animal, you observe Allah in everything. But these are not of the same nature of ibadat. If you must make the classification a dual classification, ibadat and mu'amalat, and that's it, ibadat and mu'amalat and that's it, then you may want to say that hunting and slaughtered animals and food and beverages are part of the ibadat. Because here you're not interacting with a different creation in the caliber of being your equal or your partner or your counterpart, which is mu'amalat. The essence of mu'amalat is that you are interacting with your counterparts. Your counterparts, family laws, financial laws, you're interacting with your counterparts. But here, although you're interacting with creation, food is a creation, drinks, hunting, but they are not as your counterparts. So what you're observing here is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is what you're primarily observing here. And the rulings that pertain to this have some devotional aspect to them. So when you say Bismillah before you slaughter, it's a devotional aspect. It is not like a mu'amalat where it is not, where, mu'amalat are all comprehensible. You would be able to understand the wisdom behind the mu'amalat, whether you individually could or not, but the wisdoms are comprehensible. The illah, or the effective cause behind every legislation, is comprehensible, whether or not you understand it in mu'amalat. So here they put food and beverages, the rulings that pertain to eating and drinking, the slaughtering the animals and so on, in ibadat, because they found that they are more devotional, those rulings, than usually the rulings in mu'amalat, and they found that you are not transacting with your counterparts in these rulings. But some of the scholars, if you don't have to follow the dual classification in fiqh that things are either ibadat or mu'amalat, some of the scholars had a third category. They called that al-adab al-shar'iyya wal-adat, religious etiquettes and customs. Religious etiquettes and customs, adab shar'iyya wa adat. This is basically not an active worship and not a transaction. It's in the middle. When you walk into the bathroom, say such and such. Walk with your left foot. When you walk out of the bathroom, say such as walk with your, how you dress and things like that. Dressing, these are not ibadat per se, they are not mu'amalat per se, there are customs, religious etiquettes, personal conduct, customs, and so on. Tadawi, seeking medicine, is part of this category. It's part of this category. What about jihad? Jihad was placed under ibadat here, although some of the scholars place it under mu'amalat, because it depends. If they are looking at the devotional aspect of it and they see that the devotional aspect is higher than the transaction itself. Some scholars said it's an interaction between you and other creatures. It's fighting, rules of fighting. So they should belong to mu'amalat. But the scholars who put jihad under the chapters of ibadat, they felt that the devotional part of it overweighs, overshadows that interaction. Because jihad is basically you're sacrificing yourself and your money. And the primary intent is the pleasure of Allah. You're primarily observing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not like family laws where there are rights and obligations and a balance between rights and obligation, and you're pursuing your interest in marriage, you're pursuing your interest in business partnership, you're pursuing your business in whatever financial interactions there is, you're pursuing, part of it is pursuing your interest. So it's a mu'amala in this sense, but mu'amala between you and the creatures in this sense. But when it comes to jihad, they felt, the scholars who put it under the chapters of Ibadat, they felt that it is more of a mu'amala between you and Allah than it is a mu'amala between you and the creation. It goes like this more than it goes like this. So that's why they put it here. And then in the chapters of topics included in the transactions section, مباحث قسم المعاملات, the most important topics they included in this section were marriage and divorce, which are called sometimes al-Ahwal al-Shakhsiyya, family laws, and penalties, prescribed punishments, retribution, and discretionary punishments. Penalties, al-Uqubat, which include in Islam prescribed punishments, that's al-Hudud. Retribution is al-Qisas, and discretionary punishment is al-Ta'zir. And we know that most of the Islamic penal law, most of the uqubat in Islam, the penalties in Islam, are of which section? Hudud or Ta'zir? The Qisas is clear. Qisas is retribution. Like an eye for an eye, you kill, you be killed, etc. This is Qisas, retribution, equal for equal, an eye for an eye. That is Qisas. But then the other violations, we have the hudud and the discretionary punishments. They make so much of a big deal about hudud, even though 95% of the penalties in Islam are left for the discretionary punishment, ta'zir, left for the community to decide what the punishment should be for this offense, left for the society to decide this. There is no, prescribed punishment for each and every offense. There are 6 prescribed punishments. And why did Allah designate those punishments for? Because Allah knows that those offenses have enormous consequences, and deterrence is important. Therefore, the punishment should be deterring enough, and it should be fixated so that the people do not, underestimate the danger of such offenses. And it is not about the punishment as much as it is about deterrence. And how do you prove this? That it is not about punishment as much as it is about deterrence? Yes.
The crime of cutting the hand was stealing was almost abolished in history. Right?
No, this is you could certainly say that it is effective deterrence, but I'm saying it is legislated for deterrence more than for punishment. And
Crime rate statistics?
huh?
The crime rate statistics? Like in Saudi Arabia.
Crime statistics, you use this. This is the same kind of thing that Abdullah pointed out. But there is no punishment for eating pork. There is no hadd for eating pork. Right? So it tells you what? Because eating pork was mentioned more times than the other crimes that were mentioned in the Quran that have prescribed punishments. But it is about the urgency, the urge to do the act. When the urge is huge, the deterrence must be bigger so that it prevents you from. So things like stealing and zina and, these things, there is like a huge urge to perform the act. So the fence that should be built between you and this act should be higher based on the attraction, the pulling force to do this act. And since the pulling force is huge, Allah erected a fence between you and this act so that you contemplate the consequences in this dunya before the hereafter, so that you don't commit this act which has enormous consequences on the well-being of the individual, the family, the society, the ummah at large. So al-uqubat would be of muamalat, sales, loans, mortgages, watering and sharecropping, leasing and hiring, transfer of payment, which is hawala, preemption, shuf'a, procuratorship, which is al-wakala, borrowing, that is, qard, deposits for safekeeping, that is al-wadi'a, misappropriation, that is al-ghasb, waifs and foundlings, that's al-luqata wal-laqit, guarantorship, that's al-kafala, bounty wages, al-ja'ala, partnerships, al-sharikat, judiciary, al-qada, endowments, endowments will be al-awqaf, al-waqf, plural would be awqaf, gifts, that's al-hadiyya, or hiba, or al-atiyya, interdiction, that's al-Haj, when you seize the, when you prevent someone from disposing of their money. Testaments or wills, that is al-wasiyya, rulings of inheritance, all of these are under al-muamalat. And if you don't want to adhere to the dual division, the dual classification, which ones you will take out of here? This you will take out, and this, yes, al-qada, you will take out. And where do you place them? They are not ibadat for sure. Prescribed punishments and judiciary proceedings. A fourth category, which is called al-qada wal-hudud al-jinayat. Qada and prescribed punishments and penal laws. Basically, in the scholars who wanted to put this in a fourth category observed what? Observed the difference in nature between these things and the rest of the transactions. Because here your interaction is not with your counterparts, your equal, partners in this world, the creation. You are having an encounter with the law. And the judge here, is the sort of the representative of the law. So this is an encounter that is a little bit different. This is not a devotional ibadah, a devotional matter of worship between you and Allah only. This is not a transaction between you and the people only. This is of a little different nature. Just like, food and drinks and dress code and these things are of different nature, so they figured that we put it in a third category, call it religious etiquettes and customs and so on. They found that these things have a different nature, so they put it in a different category and they called it qada wa hudud al-jinayat. And the difference is that it's not a pure worship and it is not an interaction with equals, it's interaction with the law and the representatives of this law. The difference between acts of worship and transactions, as mentioned previously, the majority of the fuqaha divided legal rulings into acts of worship and transactions. They noticed tangible differences that caused them to differentiate between them. Firstly, there is a difference in terms of the original purpose of both. If the first and foremost aim of legal judgments is to seek nearness to Allah, give thanks to Him, and seek good reward in the hereafter, then this type falls under the acts of worship, such as praying, fasting, charity, and pilgrimage. However, if the aim is to achieve a worldly benefit or to organize a relationship between two individuals, groups, and the likes, then this type is categorized under the section of transactions. The second difference between the acts of worship and transactions. The jurists noticed that in essence, the acts of worship are not logic-based. The text simply came regarding them, either commanding or prohibiting, and none grasps their ultimate reality but Allah. Why do you pray Dhuhr 4 rakahs, Maghrib 3 rakahs, Asr 4, Fajr 4? You know, someone would say, well, it's, you know, I would say, had I done it, I would have made Dhuhr 2 rakahs because you're busy working, or Fajr 4 because that's the beginning and start. But this is nonsense. But anyway, the idea here is it is not comprehensible. It's a devotional matter that we just do it as commanded. Can you say the same thing about the prohibition of wine or the prohibition of usury? No. Quite comprehensible. Quite comprehensible. So basically, you're not going to be able to understand all of their wisdoms and objectives, which the text stated or alluded to, except what the text stated or alluded to. And whenever the text alludes to some wisdom, you're not going to use this for qiyas, because the acts of worship are very fixed, you know, and there is very limited room for qiyas. Nothing more effectively proves there being strictly devotional matters than the fact that many of its elements are not understood by the mind. Even if one could grasp the wisdom behind them, this only occurs in a general sense. As for customs, they usually carry some clear significance which the human mind can perceive many of its secrets. For this reason, when the wise people legislated during the absence of the divine messages, their discretion led them to correctly legislate, and many of their legislations were later confirmed by Islam. You know, you find a lot of laws in previous nations that are quite acceptable Islamically. Why? Because by default, Allah had given you, you know, the capacity to sort out between right and wrong and to realize your benefits in this life without the deen. By default, you should be able, but not absolutely, not generally, not all the time, and not to ultimate perfection. Why not absolutely and generally? Why not absolutely and generally? Because you have, although Allah gave you that discretion, mental discretion, Allah gave human beings the mental discretion to distinguish between right and wrong. Tahsin wa taqbih, al-Aqli, which is the mental considering of something hasan, good, beautiful, or qabih, ugly, bad, evil. So tahsin wa taqbih al-Aqli, or the considering of something bad, or is a capacity that human beings were given, but limited, somewhat limited, and clouded by human aggression, human transgression, you know, human vanity. So many laws that were made in the past showed human aggression, humans being aggressive towards other humans, you know, humans not holding the rest of the humans equal, you know, colonialists and their subjects, you know, masters and slaves, and so on and so forth. These laws that were made that, you know, were departures from that quality that Allah had given us, which is the ability to sort out right from wrong. when did we depart? When we failed to see the whole picture because of our limited vision, narrow or short. Sometimes it's narrowness, sometimes it's shortness. Limited vision, that is one factor that affects the default, which is human capacity of distinction between good and bad. تحسين والتقبيح العقلي. A hiba, a gift that Allah had given us, has two defects. One, our limited, vision, understanding, shortness or narrowness. Two, our vanity, aggression, transgression, etc., that clouds it. So sometimes we're really unable, that is ad-dallin, like we get lost, and sometimes our vanity and aggression clouds our decision, even though without this vanity or aggression, if we think about it, we'll be able to figure it out. It is not because of our short or limited vision or narrow vision or so on, which is true sometimes. Sometimes you excel in making a decision or a law, and you really want the best interest of your society, and you get it wrong because of your limited ability. And sometimes you're not excelling to reach the right law for the society, for the well-being of the society, because your decision is clouded by your own personal interests, your own vanity, your own inequity, and so on and so forth. But in general, those rulings, the human intellect would lead the people to making the right rulings. And if the human intellect did not suffer from those two issues, it would always agree with the Sharia. Ignorance and transgression. And these are the two issues mentioned in the Quran. وحملها الإنسان إنه كان ظلوما جهولا إن عرضنا الأمانة على السماوات والأرض والجبال فأبين أن يحملنها وأشفقن منها وحملها الإنسان إنه كان ظلوما جهولا. We have presented the trust to the heavens and the earth and the mountains and to the creations outside of humanity. The trust of what? The choice. To be endowed with a choice. So they feared from the trust, and they wanted to be subdued and not have any choice. وَحَمَلَهَا الْإِنسان, but the human took it on, that trust of having the choice. إِنَّهُ كَانَ ظَلُومًا جَهُولًا, he was ظلوم, aggressor, jahul, ignorant. If you don't have these two qualities, تحسين والتقبيح العقلي, that Allah had given you, will get you always to agree with the position of the Sharia. But that is impossible, because you will not, those two qualities, you will never be able to get rid of them completely. Yet, many times, rulings of sane people would agree with the Sharia, because of the default of that capacity, that ni'mah, that hiba, that gift that Allah had given humanity, just to be able to sort out right from wrong. Everybody would agree that cruelty to animals is bad, right? Regardless of their religion. Of course, there were instances. Of course, there were instances when they did arrive at incorrect conclusions, laws in the past, because of these two, zalum, jahud, aggressor and ignorant. This fact is further supported by the legislative approach in transactions. So the fact that transactions are comprehensible, can be grasped by the mind, the rulings of the transactions. This fact is further supported by the legislative approach in transactions. It did not tend to delve into specific details, but rather came with holistic principles and general guidelines then it frequently expressed the justifications for these guidelines in order to help the jurists apply these principles in various times and environments. As for the acts of worship, the complete opposite took place. The Quran introduced them in general terms, and the Messenger ﷺ clarified their every detail. So you find so many hadith about each and every movement in your prayer, because they are fixated. They don't need to be changed. They should be detailed. But when it comes to financial transactions, you have the hadith that you have in all of the financial transactions, all of them are less than the hadith that you have in one chapter, prayer or Hajj or one of the acts of worship. Why? Because they are limited to give you the tracks, but not to give you the small details, because they are changeable with time. And you extrapolate from those principles what suits you in different times and places. Thirdly, the third difference between acts of worship and transactions: while performing acts of worship, the worshiper must know beforehand. Here we will talk about the reward, and the validity of the act. So basically what he's trying to say here is that in order for this act of worship to count for you, you must know beforehand that it is prescribed, and you must intend nearness to Allah so that it is valid and so that it is reward worthy. But for transactions, do you need to do that? No. When you borrow some money from someone and pay him back, paying him back is valid, right? You paid him back, even though you did not intend nearness to Allah by it. Now, if you intend to pay him back because you're observing Allah, you get rewarded in the hereafter as well. But the act itself is valid without intention. Your financial transactions are all valid if they are valid without intention. They don't require an intention. Now, if you're smart, you could actually capitalize on those and get some reward in the hereafter by having a good intention when you perform them, when you pay someone back, or you fulfill the terms of the contract with someone else. But if you did not do this with the right intention and it was a ibadah, you don't get anything, right? So you make like an act of worship and you did not have the right intention. Do you get anything? You don't get anything. So it is invalid. You need to repeat it. You went to Hajj without the right intention. Without intention. You need to go back to Hajj. You didn't make Hajj. So you like prayed without intention. You need to repeat it. You borrowed money from someone and then you pay them back without intention. Do you need to pay him back again? No. The act is valid, but you're not going to get rewarded in the hereafter. Had you provided your intention, had you been mindful of Allah, all you need to do is to be mindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when you do these things. So it's not like you're not gonna work and work my intention and just being mindful of Allah throughout your life will get all of these things in place. So everything that you will be doing while you're mindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you'll get rewarded for. So that is why the beautiful advice of the Prophet ﷺ to Abdullah ibn Abbas, احفظ الله يحفظ. Just be mindful of Allah. Okay, so that, I explained that whole point. And that will bring us to the end of what we wanted to go over today. And inshallah next time we will talk about the inclusion of secondary man-made laws under the subjects of Islamic law. So we will talk about public and private laws, international law, financial, constitutional, penal laws, administrative laws, and how all of them are included in the fiqh and where they are included in fiqh. Because nowadays it is important for us to understand that the comprehensiveness of Islamic fiqh, which is not to say that there is no room for human thought. There is huge room for human thought, because as we said, fiqh gave us some principles, but will there be a legislatory branch of the government? Yes, there will be a legislatory branch of the government, because they need to figure out the details, while being mindful of the principles that Allah had given us. We need to, craft the details, which are so many, to be worked out. Now, will we call this musharri'? Well, because it's a little bit trickery here. Is this a form of tashri'ah? No, because Allah is the only musharri', the only giver of shara'. But this one will be, it is al-Haj wal-Aqd, is the people in charge and authority. But is their role considered to be tashri'ah or clarification of the tashri'ah? It's more a clarification of the tashri'ah. Even if much of the details require human thought and human discretion and so on, but as long as you're bound by the milestones set by the Shara', you are still within the bounds of the Shara', and you're still clarifying, you're not innovating a Sharia of your own, because you're still bound by the Shara'. So now whenever you're talking about financial transactions, you're always mindful of watching for riba, usury, watching for gharar, excessive risk taking, watching for ghabn, inequity, cheating, inequity, and all of that. So as long as you're mindful of this, your lawmaking will be bound by the Sharia and in accordance with the Sharia. So we will see how the Islamic law included all of those branches of laws in contemporary times. Because like I said, we do need, times change, and you do need to be more specific. Like our scholars in the past, they used fiqh for a different purpose than the earlier scholars of the righteous predecessors. They had different classifications of sciences and so on. We could also do the same thing. We could also say to the world that we have administrative laws, financial laws, constitutional laws, penal laws, public laws, whether they are foreign public laws, that's called international laws, or domestic public laws, and their divisions are such. This would not be innovating. This would be just like living your time, and would not be innovating, because you will take the fiqh and rearrange it so that it corresponds to all of this.